Bismarck Sea, March 3, 1943, 0600 hours. Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura stands on the bridge of his flagship, watching 8 destroyers escort 8 fully loaded transport ships through waters that Japanese naval doctrine considers firmly within the Empire's domain. The convoy carries desperately needed reinforcements for the 51st Division. 6,900 soldiers promised to Lieutenant General Atazo Adachi at La Kimura has every reason to believe they will arrive safely. For more than a year, Japanese warships have sailed these seas without serious opposition from American surface forces. What Admiral Kimura cannot possibly know, what no Japanese naval officer could imagine even in his darkest nightmares, is that American mechanics working in Australian workshops have transformed medium bombers into weapons that will turn these waters into a killing field. Within 4 hours, modified B-25 Mitchell bombers, bristling with .50 caliber machine guns jutting from their noses like the fangs of a mechanical predator, will reduce his convoy to burning wreckage scattered across the Bismarck Sea. The Japanese Navy's confidence is grounded in experience. Victories at Pearl Harbor and in the Java Sea, the apparent inability of high-altitude American bombers to hit moving ships, and the belief that destroyers' anti-aircraft guns can deal with any low-flying aircraft reckless enough to come within range. Captain Tamichi Hara, commanding the destroyer Shiger, has sailed repeatedly between Rabaul and La. He knows the Americans have tried everything to stop Japanese convoys, high-altitude bombing by B-17 flying fortresses that rarely hits anything, torpedo attacks that demand long, straight approaches and expose attackers to devastating fire, and medium-altitude bombing that gives ships ample time to maneuver away from falling bombs. The Imperial Japanese Navy has developed specific countermeasures to aerial attack, sharp evasive maneuvers, concentrated anti-aircraft fire from multiple ships, and fighter cover from the 11th Air Fleet based at Rabaul. These tactics have proven effective often enough that Admiral Genichi Mikawa approved the convoy, fully aware that American forces would detect it. Japanese naval officers view aerial warfare differently from their American counterparts. To them, it is primarily a contest between ships and horizontal bombers or torpedo planes, engagements in which disciplined anti-aircraft fire and precise maneuvering can defeat most attacks. Commander Yasumi Doi aboard the destroyer Tokitsuke's has drilled his gun crews relentlessly, training them to lead targets correctly with their 25mm cannons and to maintain steady fire even under attack. The convoy's defenses form what Japanese doctrine calls an umbrella steel. 127mm guns, dozens of 13mm machine guns, and the dual-purpose 5-inch guns of the destroyers. These weapons have repeatedly shot down or driven off American aircraft, reinforcing the belief that the convoy can withstand whatever the Allies send against it. The transport ships themselves carry more than soldiers. Their hold are packed with ammunition, medical supplies, food, and equipment desperately needed by Japanese forces struggling to hold New Guinea. The largest transport, Kembu Maru, displacing over 6,000 tons, carries an entire regiment of the 51st Division, men who have waited for weeks at Rabaul for weather suitable to sail. Each ship has been loaded with meticulous care, maximizing troop capacity while preserving essential supplies. The soldiers have been briefed. They are entering a combat zone where American aircraft are active, but Japanese naval superiority is expected to protect them during the short voyage to La. The convoy holds precise formation. Destroyers screen the transports, alert for submarines and aircraft, executing procedures refined through 2 years of war in the Pacific. What makes March 3rd, 1943 different from every previous convoy operation is not immediately apparent to the Japanese lookouts when the first American aircraft appear from the south. Lieutenant Commander Ikeda aboard the destroyer Sashio reports multiple contacts at medium altitude, what appears to be a routine American bombing force of B-17s, and B-25s approaching at roughly 7,000 feet, exactly the kind of attack the convoy has trained for. Gun crews swing their weapons skyward, calculating deflection and altitude, preparing to unleash the familiar curtain of anti-aircraft fire that has protected so many convoys before. What they do not yet see are the other aircraft approaching at wave-top height. 25 Mitchell's modified in ways the Japanese cannot imagine. The conversion of the B-25 Mitchell into a low-level strafing gunship represents one of the most important tactical innovations of the Pacific War. Born from frustration with the failure of conventional bombing against ships, Major Paul Irving Gunn, known as Pappy, a former Navy pilot turned Army Air Forces officer, recognized that hitting maneuvering ships from high altitude was nearly impossible and that torpedo attacks required specialized training and equipment unavailable to the Army Air Forces in the Southwest Pacific. Working alongside North American Aviation Field Representative Jack Fox at Eagle Farm Airfield near Brisbane, Australia, Gunn began radically modifying B-25 Mitchell bombers. The bombardier's position in the nose was removed and replaced with additional .50 caliber machine guns, for at first, later expanded to 8 in subsequent versions. These changes demanded extensive reinforcement of the aircraft's nose structure, expanded ammunition storage, and careful redistribution of weight to keep the aircraft stable in flight. Gunn and his mechanics solved these challenges through relentless trial and error, often modifying aircraft by day and testing them by night. The weapon chosen for the new configuration was the Browning .50 caliber machine gun, firing the M8 armor-piercing incendiary round. Each 619-grain projectile left the barrel at 2,910 feet per second, fast enough to penetrate destroyer deck plating and ignite fires upon impact. Each gun could fire approximately 850 rounds per minute. With 8 guns firing simultaneously, a single B-25 could unleash 6,800 rounds per minute, a volume of fire capable of shredding a ship's superstructure, wiping out anti-aircraft positions, and killing exposed crewmen before they could react. The psychological impact of this weapon proved nearly as devastating as its physical effects. Japanese sailors who survived these attacks later described the terror of watching a B-25's nose erupt in continuous muzzle flashes, knowing that hundreds of armor-piercing rounds were about to tear through their ship. At the same time, the development of skip bombing tactics perfectly complemented the new strafing configuration. This technique allowed B-25s to attack ships at extremely low altitude while delivering bombs with unprecedented accuracy. Major William Benn of the 43rd Bombardment Group had pioneered skip bombing using B-17s, discovering that bombs released from 200 to 250 feet above the water would skip across the surface like stones, slamming into a ship's hull or detonating close enough to cause lethal damage. Skip bombing demanded exceptional precision and nerve. Pilots had to fly straight and level directly toward their targets at low altitude, exposing themselves to intense anti-aircraft fire. But the accuracy achieved was revolutionary compared to high-altitude bombing. Crews practiced relentlessly against the wreck of the SS Pruth, stranded on a reef near Port Moresby, learning to judge distance, speed, and release timing until they could reliably place bombs on target. General George Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force, immediately grasped the potential of combining skip bombing with a heavily armed B-25 Strafer. He envisioned a new kind of aircraft, what he called commerce destroyers, designed specifically to annihilate Japanese shipping. By March 1943, the 3rd Attack Group had fully converted its B-25s to the Strafer configuration, with the 90th Bombardment Squadron under Major Edward Ed Larner leading the development of low-level attack tactics that exploited the 8-gun nose to maximum effect. The standard attack profile called for B-25 to approach at 1,000 to 1,500 feet, then descend to wave-top height approximately 2 miles from the target. Accelerating to maximum speed, the pilot would line up directly on the enemy ship at roughly 1,500 yards. He would open fire with all 8 nose guns, saturating the target with armor-piercing incendiary rounds while maintaining course for the skip bombing run. The first indication Admiral Kimura receives that something unprecedented is unfolding comes when American B-17s at 7,000 feet begin their bombing runs. Every Japanese anti-aircraft gun in the convoy responds exactly as trained. Destroyer crews pour disciplined barges of 25 millimeters and 5-inch fire into the sky, tracer rounds forming lethal patterns around the high-altitude bombers. This is precisely what American planners intended. While every Japanese eye is fixed upward and every gun barrel points skyward, 13 Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighters and 12 B-25 Mitchell Strafers from the 3rd Attack Group roar in from the southwest at wave-top height, so low that their propeller wash kicks up spray across the ocean surface. Major Edward Larner leads the B-25 attack in his Mitchell Ruthless, approaching the destroyer Shiryuki at nearly 280 miles per hour. Larner can see Japanese sailors on deck pointing at his aircraft in shock and disbelief. The Japanese have seen B-25s before, but never like this. Never with 8 dark gun ports in the nose, machine guns protruding like accusatory fingers. Never at an altitude where the pilot can see individual faces on the deck below. Larner holds his fire until he closes to 1,200 yards. Then he squeezes the trigger. Instantly, 8 streams of .50 caliber fire reach out toward Shiryuki, tracer rounds forming solid lines of light between aircraft and ship. The effect is immediate and catastrophic. Hundreds of armor-piercing incendiary rounds slam into the destroyer's bridge and superstructure at nearly 3,000 feet per second. Bridge windows explode in clouds of glass, shredding anyone nearby. Gun shields offer no protection, as rounds punch through steel as if it were paper. Within seconds, Shiryuki's anti-aircraft fire falls silent. Its gun crews are literally cut apart by the concentrated barrage. A Japanese ensign, Takashi Mieta, one of the few survivors on the bridge, would later describe the attack as being caught inside a giant metal cutting saw, watch his captain and most of the bridge crew cut down in moments by flashing, sparking rounds tearing through steel bulkheads. Larner maintains his firing run for 8 seconds, pouring more than 900 rounds into Shiryuki, before releasing 2 500-pound bombs. They skip across the water like stones and slam into the destroyer's hull just below the waterline. The bombs, fitted with 5-second delay fuses, punch through Shiryuki's hull before detonating. The explosions break the destroyer's back, tearing open massive breaches that flood her engine rooms within minutes. As Larner pulls up and away, his dorsal gunner rakes the deck with turret-mounted .50 caliber fire. Shiryuki is already listing hard to port, her crew abandoning their guns to fight flooding that cannot be contained. Behind Larner, 11 more B-25 select targets throughout the convoy. Their pilots are astonished by how the Japanese ships appear momentarily paralyzed by an attack unlike anything they have faced. Lieutenant John Hanabri targets the transport Kokusamaru, walking an 8-gun burst from bow to stern. His tracers punch through the bridge, demolish forward cargo handling gear, and silence anti-aircraft positions before his skip bombs smash into the hull. The transport's captain attempts to maneuver clear, but the helm does not respond. The helmsman and most of the bridge crew are already dead, cut down by .50 caliber rounds that have turned the bridge into a charnel house of shattered bodies and twisted steel. The Beaufighters add to the devastation. Their 4 20mm cannons and 6.303 caliber machine guns concentrate on gun positions and bridge crews, suppressing any attempt at organized offense. Flight Sergeant Fred Cassidy of No. 30 Squadron makes his run against the transport Teal Maru from 500 feet, diving to mast height in the final seconds as his cannons tear into the superstructure. Cassidy later recalls watching the ship's bridge simply disintegrate under the impact of 20mm explosive rounds. Sailors thrown into the air, lifeboats smashed into splinters as his fire found them. Skip bombing proves devastatingly effective. Bomb after bomb skips across the water, slamming into Japanese hulls at the waterline. The delayed action fuses ensure penetration before detonation. The transport Nojima takes 3 skip bomb hits in rapid succession. The explosions peel open her hull like an opener, flooding holes crammed with soldiers packed into spaces never meant for men. Wearing full combat gear, they have no chance of escape. Witnesses later say their screams can be heard even over the roar of engines and exploding ammunition. Commander Yasumi Doi aboard Tokitsuke's watches in horror as his meticulously trained gun crews are swept away by streams of .50 caliber fire, their bodies literally torn apart by the heavy rounds. He tries to organize a defense, shouting orders to redirect fire toward the low-flying attackers, but gunners are killed faster than they can respond. Those who survive are too terrified to remain at their posts as B-25s charge in, noses flickering with muzzle flashes. The Imperial Japanese Navy has never trained for this. It has never imagined medium bombers transformed into flying gun platforms bristling with forward-firing weapons, nor developed tactics to counter an attack that combines strafing and bombing at wave-top height. The destroyer Horatio attempted to interpose herself between the attackers and the transports, her captain trying to shield the vulnerable cargo ships with his warship. The gesture is brave and fatal. 3 B-25s converge on Horatio, their combined 24 guns pouring more than 2,000 rounds per minute into her superstructure. The bridge is obliterated, fire control systems destroyed, and her rudder jammed hard to starboard. Out of control, Horatio collides with the transport Nojima, locked together. Both ships burn as fires spread between them, their crews unable to separate the vessels or contain the flames. From his flagship, Admiral Kimura watches his convoy disintegrate around him, struggling to comprehend what is happening. The attack fits no pattern recognized by Japanese doctrine. The Americans are not making torpedo runs that can be evaded, nor bombing from altitude where ships can maneuver clear. Instead, they bore in at point-blank range, automatic weapons turning his ships into slaughterhouses. Kimura orders evasive maneuvers, but the B-25s are too fast and too numerous, seeming to strike from every direction at once. Their 8-gun noses spit death at any ship that tries to maintain formation. The transport Oigawa Maru becomes a prime target when her captain commits a fatal error, turning broadside to the oncoming B-25s and presenting a perfect target. Lieutenant Donald McCullough, flying sleepy time gal, approaches from the beam and opens fire at 1,500 yards. His 8-gun sends streams of armor-piercing, incendiary rounds into hull at the waterline. Fires erupt in cargo holds packed with ammunition and fuel, triggering secondary explosions that tear entire sections out of the ship's side. McCullough's skip bombs complete the destruction, breaking Oigawa Maru in two. She sinks so rapidly that most of her 1,500 embarked soldiers have no chance to escape. The entire attack lasts barely 15 minutes. In that brief span, a carefully organized convoy is reduced to a scattered field of burning, sinking wrecks. The destroyer Asagumo, attempting to rescue survivors from the water, is herself attacked. 2 B-25s sweep her decks clear of personnel with gunfire before skip bombs tear open her hull below the waterline. Japanese sailors struggling in the water, believing the worst is over, look up in terror as B-25s return to make strafing runs on lifeboats and swimmers. American pilots are following explicit orders. No Japanese reinforcements are to reach New Guinea. By 10:15 a.m., as the last B-25 disappears to the south, Admiral Kimura surveys the devastation around him and realizes that the Imperial Japanese Navy has just experienced something that will fundamentally alter naval warfare in the Pacific. Of his 8 transport ships, all are sinking or already beneath the waves, burning funeral pyres marking their final positions as they carry vital supplies and equipment down with them. Cargo desperately needed at La, for Kimura's 8 destroyers are gone, including his flagship Shirayuki. The surviving escorts are battered and scarred, their decks strewn with dead and wounded, their superstructures riddled with .50 caliber holes. As rescue operations begin, the scale of the human loss becomes brutally clear. The water is choked with wreckage and bodies, but there are remarkably few survivors. Of the 6,900 soldiers who sail from Rabaul, fewer than 1,200 will eventually reach La, most of them rescued after dark by Japanese submarines. The bulk of the 51st Division is destroyed not in ground combat where it might have fought back, nor by naval gunfire that would have given warning, but board transports turned into death traps within minutes by modified bombers. Captain Tamichi Hara, one of the few senior officers to survive, later writes that the attack was unlike anything the Japanese Navy had ever experienced or even imagined possible. He describes the B-25s as seeming to saw ships in half with their concentrated firepower. The psychological impact on the Imperial Japanese Navy proves even greater than the physical losses. As news of the convoy's annihilation spreads through the fleet, officers who had long dismissed American bombing as ineffective are forced to confront a grim reality. The Americans have created a weapon against which traditional naval defenses offer no protection. The 8.50 caliber guns in a single B-25's nose represent more forward-firing automatic weapons than many destroyers carry, and unlike ship-mounted guns, they can be brought to bear with the speed, surprise, and flexibility of aircraft. Japanese naval doctrine, built around surface engagements and conventional aerial attacks, has no answer for flying gunships capable of destroying a convoy in minutes. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, receives a report of the Bismarck Sea disaster with visible shock. He immediately understands that Japan can no longer risk surface vessels in waters within range of American aircraft. The Navy's inability to protect even a heavily escorted convoy means that reinforcing and resupplying forward positions will become nearly impossible, effectively condemning Japanese garrisons throughout New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. Yamamoto orders an immediate review of convoy procedures and anti-aircraft defenses, but privately admits to his staff that there may be no effective counter to the American B-25 Strafers. The transformation of the B-25 Mitchell from a conventional medium bomber into a low-level gunship stands as a triumph of American mechanical ingenuity, born not from pre-war doctrine or long-term planning, but from the brutal demands of combat. Working with limited resources under primitive conditions, Paul Gunn and his teams created a weapon that proved more lethal against shipping than many purpose-built attack aircraft, exemplifying American talent for rapid innovation and adaptation. The 8-gun nose modifications soon become standard on late production B-25J models. North American Aviation incorporates field modifications directly into factory production, producing aircraft capable of carrying up to 18 forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns. After the victory in the Bismarck Sea, B-25 Strafer spread throughout the Southwest Pacific, appearing wherever Japanese shipping attempt to operate. In August 1943, the 345th Bombardment Group, the Air Apaches, receives Strafers and immediately begins hunting Japanese coastal traffic around New Guinea, their aircraft adorned with distinctive shark mouths that soon become synonymous with death among Japanese sailors. The 38th Bombardment Group also converts to Strafers, developing new tactics for attacking harbors and anchorages, including night operations guided by radar. By late 1943, Japanese naval officers report that daylight movement of anything larger than a fishing boat has become suicidal in waters within B-25 range. The impact on Japanese logistics is catastrophic. Forced to rely increasingly on submarines and fast destroyers running supplies at night, the Navy can deliver only a fraction of what surface convoys once carried. As a result, Japanese forces across the Pacific begin to suffer acute shortages of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. The garrison at La, whose reinforcement was the entire purpose of the March 3rd convoy, never receives adequate support and is ultimately evacuated in September 1943. The surviving soldiers are forced into brutal marches through jungle and mountains, suffering massive losses from starvation and disease. Japanese attempt to counter the B-25 Strafers proved largely ineffective. The aircraft's speed, firepower, and low-level tactics make them extremely difficult targets for fighters, leaving Japan without a practical defense against a weapon that shattered its control of the Southwest Pacific. While low-level attacks render heavy anti-aircraft guns largely ineffective, the Japanese attempt to adapt. New countermeasures are introduced, including desperate fighter tactics in which pilots attempt to ram attacking B-25s. These measures prove futile. Nothing halts the steady destruction of Japanese shipping. By mid-1944, the Japanese merchant marine has lost more than 60% of its total tonnage. A significant portion of that loss is attributed to B-25 B-25 strafing and skip bombing attacks that can turn transports and cargo ships into burning wrecks in a matter of minutes. The B-25 strafers continue their relentless campaign throughout 1944, expanding their mission beyond shipping to include Japanese airfields, where their 8-gun noses prove equally lethal. The raids on Wewak in August 1943 demonstrate this versatility with devastating clarity. In a series of low-level attacks, B-25 strafers destroy more than 170 Japanese aircraft on the ground, leaving the Japanese Fourth Air Army virtually incapacitated. Japanese pilots later described the horror of watching American bombers approach at treetop height, their nose guns cutting a path of destruction through carefully dispersed aircraft before bombs finished the work. During the Battle of Bayak in May and June 1944, B-25 strafers once again play a decisive role. On June 8th, 10 B-25 from the 17th Reconnaissance Squadron attack a Japanese destroyer force attempting to reinforce the island. Their 8-gun noses rake the destroyer Harrison with armor-piercing incendiary fire before skip bombs send her to the bottom. The attack forces the Japanese to abandon the reinforcement effort entirely, leaving the Bayak garrison isolated. Another example of how B-25 strafers can influence entire campaigns by denying the enemy freedom of movement at sea. The crews who fly these modified B-25 develop a distinct culture of their own. They paint elaborate nose art and give their aircraft names like Dirty Dora, Pluto, and Hell's Angel, names that reflect the aircraft's brutal purpose. These men know they're flying something unique, an aircraft combining the range and payload of a bomber with firepower surpassing that of most fighters. They take pride in destroying shipping that conventional bombers cannot reliably hit, fully aware that every ship sunk means fewer supplies and reinforcements reaching Japanese garrisons. For Japanese survivors, encounters with B-25 strafers leave deep psychological scars. Lieutenant Hiroshi Yamamoto, rescued from the transport Kokusamaru, later speaks of recurring nightmares involving American planes with 8 eyes of death. Commander Toshio Abe, who witnessed the Bismarck Sea catastrophe from a rescue destroyer, reports that his crew becomes paralyzed with fear whenever they hear aircraft engines, knowing that B-25 strafers could appear without warning. The effectiveness of the B-25 strafer fundamentally reshapes Japanese strategic planning. Commanders are forced to assume that any daylight movement will be detected and attacked. Operations that would have been routine in 1942 become nearly impossible by late 1943, compelling Japan to adopt increasingly desperate measures to sustain its scattered garrisons. The famous Tokyo Express destroyer runs to Guadalcanal represent one such adaptation, relying on speed and darkness to evade air attack. Even these missions suffer losses once B-25 strafers equipped with radar begin conducting night interdiction. By early 1944, Japanese naval officers are submitting reports describing the B-25 strafer as the most feared weapon in the Pacific, more destructive than submarines, more accurate than dive bombers, and more flexible than torpedo aircraft. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, Chief of Staff of the Combined Fleet, admits in a classified assessment that the Imperial Navy has no effective defense against mass strafer attacks. He recommends that surface vessels avoid operating within 500 miles of American air bases, effectively conceding vast areas of the Pacific to Allied control. The Australian contribution to the B-25 strafer force deserves special recognition. Royal Australian Air Force crews fly alongside Americans throughout the campaign, with No. 18 Squadron RAF operating B-25 strafers from 1944 onward. Their aircraft, marked with RAF roundels but armed with the same devastating 8-gun noses, proved particularly effective against Japanese coastal shipping in the Netherlands East Indies. Australian pilots' intimate knowledge of regional waters allows them to locate and attack targets that might otherwise escape detection. The technical evolution of the B-25 strafer continues throughout the war. Later variants incorporate rocket launchers, improved gun sights, and even experimental 75mm cannons for attacking larger vessels. The B-25J-22, the ultimate Strafer variant, mounts 8 nose guns, 4 package guns on the fuselage sides, 2 in the dorsal turret, 2 waist guns, and 2 in the tail, a total of 18.50 caliber machine guns capable of delivering overwhelming fire from multiple angles. These late war aircraft are flying arsenals, capable of annihilating entire convoys single-handedly. German and Italian military observers, learning of American Strafer tactics through intelligence reports, express astonishment at the concept of converting medium bombers into gunships. The Luftwaffe experiments with similar modifications to Junkers Ju-88 aircraft, fitting forward-firing cannons for anti-shipping missions, but never achieves a concentration of firepower or the operational impact of the B-25's 8-gun nose. Italian forces in the Mediterranean experiment with similar skip bombing techniques using SM.79 torpedo bombers, but they lack the overwhelming forward firepower needed to suppress anti-aircraft offenses in the way the B-25 Strafer can. As a result, their attacks never achieved the same level of effectiveness. The true impact of the B-25 Strafer extends far beyond its immediate tactical success, shaping post-war aircraft design and military doctrine. The concept of a heavily armed gunship proves so effective that it leads directly to aircraft such as the AC-47 Spooky and the AC-130 Spectre, employed in Vietnam and later conflicts. The integration of massive forward-firing firepower into aircraft originally designed for other roles becomes a distinctly American approach to air warfare, one that can be traced directly back to Pappy, Gunn's field modifications in Australia. Japanese military historians writing after the war acknowledged that the B-25 Strafer represents one of the most significant tactical innovations of the Pacific War, comparable in impact to radar or code breaking. Professor Masanori of the National Defense Academy of Japan writes that the Strafer destroyed not only our ships, but our entire concept of naval warfare, forcing Japan to abandon offensive operations far earlier than would otherwise have been necessary. The inability to protect shipping from Strafer attacks accelerates Japan's defeat by preventing the concentration of forces required for meaningful counteroffensives. Within the units that fly them, individual B-25 Strafer missions become legendary. Stories are passed from veteran crews to new arrivals as proof of what the aircraft can accomplish. One of the most frequently cited examples is the attack on Simpson Harbor at Rabaul on November 2, 1943. B-25 Strafers sweep across the anchorage at mass height, their guns damaging or destroying dozens of vessels, while skip bombs sink larger ships at their moorings. Japanese witnesses describe the harbor turning into a cauldron of burning oil and exploding ammunition in less than 10 minutes, with rescue efforts rendered impossible as aircraft continue strafing anyone who attempts to reach the docks. As experience grows, the modification process itself becomes increasingly refined. By late 1943, field modification centers can convert a standard B-25 into a Strafer in less than a week. 8 nose-mounted guns, expanded ammunition storage, and reinforced mounting points are installed with practiced efficiency. Ammunition feed systems are redesigned to prevent jamming during violent low-level maneuvers. Gun harmonization is perfected to concentrate fire at optimal ranges, and trigger systems are modified to allow pilots to fire selected guns or unleash all 8 simultaneously. Skip bombing tactics also evolve. Pilots learn that approaching at a slight angle rather than directly abeam makes it more difficult for anti-aircraft gunners to track them while still allowing precise bomb placement. Through hard experience, they discover that releasing bombs at approximately 60 feet altitude and about 340 yards from the target produces the most reliable skip pattern, with bombs bouncing once or twice before striking at the waterline. Fuse delays are adjusted to suit different targets. Shorter delays for lightly built transports, longer delays for armored warships. The Japanese Navy attempts to adapt to the Strafer threat through increasingly desperate measures. Additional light anti-aircraft guns are mounted wherever space allows, but these prove ineffective against the sheer volume of fire from 8 synchronized .50 caliber machine guns. Some captains attempt radical evasive maneuvers, stopping dead in the water or reversing course abruptly, but the speed and agility of B-25 allow pilots to adjust their aim almost instantly. Radar-directed anti-aircraft systems provide marginal improvement, but by the time they are fielded, American air superiority is so complete that most attacks arrive in overwhelming numbers. Behind every successful mission stands the often overlooked work of maintenance crews. Keeping heavily modified B-25 Strafers operational under primitive tropical conditions is a constant struggle. The 8 nose-mounted guns require meticulous care to prevent corrosion in the humid Pacific climate. Ammunition feeds must be cleaned and realigned after every mission, while low-level operations place extraordinary stress on engines and airframes. Crew chiefs work through sweltering nights to prepare aircraft for dawn attacks, fully aware that mechanical failure at wave-top height almost certainly means death for the crew. Equally critical is the intelligence network supporting Strafer operations. Coast watchers, submarine patrols, and code-breaking efforts provide timely information on Japanese ship movements. B-25 squadrons often receive targeting data only hours before a mission, enabling them to strike ships at their most vulnerable moments. The aircraft's range and firepower allow rapid attacks against targets of opportunity, ensuring that no Japanese vessel can feel safe anywhere within 500 miles of an American airfield. The human cost of American crews is significant. Low-level attacks against offended targets are among the most dangerous missions of the war. The 3rd Attack Group alone loses more than 40 B-25s, most shot down during strafing runs when aircraft are exposed to intense ground fire. The psychological strain of flying directly into enemy guns, holding steady under fire, and pulling up at the last possible moment takes a severe toll on pilots and crews alike. Many experienced pilots eventually reached a breaking point. After countless missions flown at treetop height, watching tracer fire rise toward their aircraft again and again, some developed severe nervous conditions and had to be removed from combat. The cumulative strain of flying straight into enemy fire, holding a steady course under attack, and pulling up at the last possible moment left lasting psychological scars. The success of the B-25 Strafer reshaped American tactical thinking across the armed forces. It demonstrated that improvised, battlefield-driven solutions could outperform weapons designed through traditional procurement channels. Commanders such as General Kenny proved decisive by encouraging experimentation, even when it contradicted established doctrine. The Strafer program illustrated how granting skilled and imaginative individuals like Pappy Gunn the freedom to test unconventional ideas could yield results that fundamentally altered how wars were fought. Japanese survivors consistently emphasized the uniquely terrifying character of Strafer attacks. The concentrated fire from the 8-gun nose transformed destruction into a mechanical, relentless process. Unlike dive bombing or torpedo attacks, where success depended heavily on precision and timing, the Strafer required only that the aircraft be aimed at its target. Once aligned, it unleashed an uninterrupted stream of fire that swept everything before it. One Japanese officer later likened the experience to facing an airborne fortress of machine guns, impossible to silence, impossible to evade, appearing suddenly and reducing ships to blazing wrecks within seconds. By 1945, Strafer tactics continued to evolve as crews trained for the anticipated invasion of Japan. New methods were developed to counter suicide boats, coastal fortifications, and industrial facilities. The forward-firing guns proved just as destructive against land targets, ripping apart locomotives, destroying radar sites, and suppressing anti-aircraft defenses during larger operations. Plans were drawn up for extensive low-level sweeps across Japanese harbors to eliminate what remained of the Imperial Navy ahead of the invasion. Japan's surrender made these operations unnecessary, but the operational concept had already proven its value. The influence of the B-25 Strafer extended far beyond the Second World War. Modern military aviation continued to embrace the idea of heavily armed attack aircraft. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, built around a massive cannon for a close-range ground attack, reflects the same philosophy. delivering overwhelming firepower at short distances. The effectiveness of later gunship aircraft, from Vietnam through more recent conflicts, can be traced back to the field workshops in Australia, where Pappy Gunn first concentrated 8 machine guns in the nose of a medium bomber. Decades after the war, veterans of Strafer units continue to gather, sharing memories of missions that once seemed nearly suicidal but achieved extraordinary results. They recalled the smell of burned propellant filling the cockpit, the violent shudder of the aircraft as all 8 guns fired together, and the sight of enemy ships disintegrating under sustained fire. They understood they had flown a weapon unlike anything else, an improvised machine that surpassed original design intentions and stood as a symbol of adaptability and innovation. In post-war assessments, Japanese military analysts identified the B-25 Strafer as one of 3 developments that sealed Japan's fate, alongside radar and code breaking. The inability to safeguard maritime transport meant the island empire could no longer function. Isolated garrisons slowly collapsed as supplies dwindled and reinforcements failed to arrive. Admiral Somu Toyota, the final commander of the combined fleet, later summarized the situation bluntly. The 8-gun B-25 eliminated Japan's freedom of movement at sea, an intolerable loss for an island nation. The technical characteristics of the Strafer gained legendary status among aviation historians. Each .50 caliber machine gun weighed roughly 64 pounds and fired up to 850 rounds per minute, demanding complex feed mechanisms to function reliably. Together, the 8 guns added more than 500 pounds to the aircraft before ammunition was even considered, requiring careful attention to balance and structural stress. With approximately 400 rounds per gun, 3,200 rounds total, the Strafer carried enough ammunition for roughly half a minute of sustained fire, though pilots typically fired in short, controlled bursts lasting only seconds. Ultimately, the B-25 Strafer represented more than a successful modification. It embodied the American wartime approach: rapid adaptation, acceptance of risk, and reliance on frontline experience rather than distant theory. Instead of waiting years for a specialized aircraft, existing bombers were altered, tested in combat, and refined under fire. That mindset proved decisive in the Pacific. By the war's conclusion, Strafer crews ranked among the most highly decorated units in the Army Air Forces. Their operations played a direct role in isolating and defeating Japanese forces across vast ocean distances. Awards and citations recognized both the danger and effectiveness of their missions, but no medal could fully convey their impact. The image of converging tracer streams reaching out across the sea, ships erupting in flame, and the balance of the campaign shifting in minutes. The final combat mission flown by B-25 Strafers occurred on August 14, 1945, the day Japan announced its surrender. Aircraft of the 345th Bombardment Group struck Japanese shipping in the inland sea. Even at the very end of the conflict, with defeat inevitable, the 8-gun noses demonstrated their lethal efficiency one last time, destroying small vessels attempting to escape toward Korea. The crews returned to find the war over. Their extraordinary weapon was no longer needed, yet the concept they had proven would influence military aviation for generations. In retrospect, the B-25 Strafer stands as perhaps the most successful field modification in the history of military aviation, transforming an ordinary medium bomber into a ship-killing machine that struck terror into the Japanese Navy. From Pappy Gunn's first experiments at Eagle Farm to the mass-produced B-25J-22 armed with 18 guns, the Strafer program demonstrates how innovation-born necessity can surpass the expectations of conventional planning. The .50 caliber gun protruding from B-25's nose became a symbol of American ingenuity and determination, proving that in modern warfare, the side that adapts fastest often prevails. Japan's encounter with the B-25 Strafer represents a story of technological surprise and tactical revolution, where long-held assumptions about aerial combat were shattered in minutes over the Bismarck Sea. The Imperial Japanese Navy, proud inheritor of the samurai tradition, and victor at Tsushima, found itself powerless against mechanics from Texas and pilots from Kansas who had turned medium bombers into flying arsenals. The 8-gun nose that Admiral Kimura saw bearing down on his convoy on March 3rd, 1943, was more than just a new weapon. It heralded a new kind of warfare, one in which innovation trumped tradition, and a handful of modified aircraft could cripple an empire's ability to sustain itself.